First of all, a confession. When the rain was falling at Derby, with the fifth T20 International looking almost certain to be abandoned, we took the decision to record a close of series podcast. We discussed the 4-0 series win for England, the performances that had taken place, and exactly where the series left the world game. But rather than just get rid of that 35 minutes or so of conversation, we've decided we're going to record a few minutes on what was a most bizarre evening here at the County Ground in Derby, because we did see a fifth match in this series. Not a T20, no, 5 overs aside between England and the West Indies. England won it in bizarre circumstances, eventually 2 no balls getting them over the line to reach their target of 42, but 7 wickets down. A strange old evening, a strange end to a very, very strange summer, but we did see a match to conclude the summer. So, Isabel Westbury, who was watching alongside me, we never thought we'd see a game, but we did, and what a strange old evening it was.
Well, I think you summed it up rather nicely there. A tumultuous end to a tumultuous summer. It was very reflective of this COVID-affected summer of cricket. We didn't think we'd get any cricket at all throughout the whole summer, throughout the whole series. We didn't think we'd get any cricket this evening, and we did. It also reflected the very, very odd game that cricket is. There was a cut-off time of 8:28 p.m. The first ball was bowled at 8:27 p.m. I can't think of any other sport that can start in such peculiar fashion and then end in such peculiar fashion as well. For a moment in their West Indies, they were having to trying to defend a total of 42 and looked for a large part of that 5-over innings as though they were going to, but it was down to the last over and, few extras to help things along, but England restoring their order at least, as they've won every single match this series.
No player in the England side scored double figures. There was run-out after run-out. In total in the innings, there were 3 of them. And a couple, as we headed right towards the business end of things, they needed 7 from the final over. It was looking like we were heading for the super over, and then Shakira Solman overstepped, and then a beamer that saw a no ball, and the game was done. This summer was always going to end like that, wasn't it?
I reckon that's going to be one of those pub quiz questions in years to come. The fact that England have won a match with all their batters scoring, no one scoring more than single figures.
And it's the first time in the history of the women's game we've seen a 5-over T20 international. So history was made.
More history as well. Deandra Dottin, who has been the standout batter of this series. She topped the run scoring table. She's been impressive to watch throughout. She became the first woman in T20 international history to score a century of sixes. Beautiful. There we go. History in the making.
History was made. It was a bizarre conclusion to things. The rain is falling so heavily here in Derby. The staff who have been working so hard to make the outfield fit to play and the square fit to play, well, they've all departed. There's not going to be any cricket here for any time soon, so there's no need to protect anything. And it's an odd sight, really. The floodlights have just been turned off, and as we head away with the international summer done, we've seen it conclude with this extraordinary 5-over-a-side match. Izzy, thank you for everything over the last few weeks, and over the next half an hour or so, you can enjoy our reflections on the women's international summer and the domestic cricket as well, with me, Isabel, and also Alex Hartley. Stay tuned. Well, we never knew whether this summer for England's women would get started. Tours that were announced and then cancelled, but eventually a 5-match T20 series between England and the West Indies played in the bio-bubble of Derby managed to take place. Plenty of cricket at the back end of September for England's women to get stuck into and for us to dissect over the next half an hour or so. And with me to do just that are the England World Cup winner Alex Hartley and the former Middlesex captain Isabel Westbury. Alex, I think first of all, we look at this summer and how it's gone, how it's played out, both in men's and women's cricket, but particularly for England's women with those tours against India and South Africa that were cancelled quite late in the day. We didn't know whether any cricket was going to happen. That we've seen anything has been a real bonus.
It really has, and I felt so sorry for the England girls because those tours against India and South Africa got postponed, got cancelled, and then the World Cup got postponed. So they're kind of been in this biosecure bubble all summer with no cricket in the pipeline. So it must have been so hard for the England girls. But luckily, the West Indies came over and we've had some international cricket.
It sounded as though it was about 2 or 3 days of utter darkness. I think that the men's was going on, you felt as if cricket was back, and then suddenly everything fell away from beneath the feet of the England women. But my goodness, aren't we glad to be here?
Absolutely, and it's that thing of uncertainty, isn't it? That's what would have made it so difficult, because you're preparing for a series, you don't know whether it's going to happen, and how do you possibly prepare when you don't know the bowlers and the batters that you're going to be up against? And that's credit to England for the professionalism, Alex, of getting the job done when they did get on the field, but also keeping the mentality of professionalism up when you don't know if you're going to be playing.
Yeah, it must have been really hard. We saw that they had some intra-squad games, and they played 50-over cricket and T20 cricket, so kind of covered all bases. But yeah, you could tell when the England girls went out there they were a little bit rusty, but luckily for England, West Indies were even rustier. So
we should, Izzy, give real credit again to West Indies for what they've done, not just for women's cricket, but for cricket in general this summer. The men's team came over at the start of the year. The women's team have come over at the back end of this summer. I mean, what enormous sacrifices have had to be made.
Well, I think, it's important to kind of give some context, I guess, to this drubbing of the West Indies by England, is that they were certainly a last-minute call-up. It happened in the space of a week, I think, that the West Indies were confirmed. And we have to remember as well, the West Indies isn't a nation; it's a group of disparate islands, which all also had different lockdown laws as well. So there are different, people had different access to training. They couldn't get the whole squad together, and then they had to come over and obviously isolate in this sort of bubble in Derby. Certainly very different weather conditions in autumn in England, but for the women, obviously it was a huge effort to get that organised, and for the men, they were coming from a roughly sort of COVID-free zone into the height of a pandemic in the United Kingdom, and I think that there's a lot of gratitude towards the West Indies. A lot of words have been spoken, and I think now the question is how that will be put into practice, because cricket globally, and especially those smaller boards, are going to have quite a financial hit in the years or so to come. Yeah,
the words of England owe these countries that have come over. We'll have to wait and see how things play out in terms of future tours. Let's look at this series then, the T20s that have been played. Alex, they pretty much been identical every single game. England have batted first. They've put on too many runs to the West Indies, who have fallen short on every occasion. The first two matches by 47 runs, and then by 20 odd, and then by, I think it was 44 in the third game. So it's all been pretty much the same formula, and it's been a little bit sort of repetitive.
It has, especially those first two games with a 47-run victory. I don't know how often that happens. I can't imagine it be too often.
And the win before, I think they had in the T20 World Cup, was a 46-run win. So it was this wonderful string of very, very identical victories.
But yeah, the West Indies have been better than they were last year. We saw them come over last year and they got absolutely dominated by England. The scorecards suggest that's been the case this year, but the West Indies have shown glimpses of where they've improved and what they can do. It's just been one of those frustrating series because we talk about on air, we know what they can do and we know what Hayley Matthews and Stefanie Taylor can do, but Dottin's been the only person that's really gone out there and done anything.
Well, that's also a big difference from last year, because Dottin, of course, was injured last year. So you almost felt so West Indies arrived sort of thinking that nothing was going to happen, whereas this, you whenever Dottin was at the crease, there was a chance. So there was that element of suspense that was retained throughout all the matches, even though, as you say, the scorecards look reasonably one-sided.
We'll go through the individual performances in a moment, but you'd expect England to win this series pretty comfortably, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and England would expect England to win this series pretty comfortably. England are probably second in the world at the minute, ranked, and West Indies maybe 6th or 7th. They haven't really got that domestic structure or those constant international fixtures that England have.
And that's going to just inevitably lead to one side being dominant over the other, particularly in these conditions and this time of year and one thing and another.
Yeah, and especially in an age where those tours are going to be fewer and far between and more uncertainty. I mean, we've already heard that England are likely to be touring New Zealand and possibly play a tri-series against New Zealand and Australia. But for the West Indies, apart from those women that we're playing in the Big Bash League, for example, that's it. They haven't got anything on the horizon.
How important was it that England's women did play this summer, Alex, first of all?
Hugely important. I think it just shows where the ECB really what they really think about women's cricket. If they'd have got the men on this summer and then decided just to rack off the England women's series, I think you would have had a lot of annoyed players. So it's really shown the players that the ECB are behind them. The ECB have come out and said there's going to be no pay cuts or anything for the women, so it just shows that the support is there for them. But yeah, it just took a while for it to happen.
Yeah, I think the thing that it sort of demonstrates the most is that countries like England, countries like Australia, are bending over backwards to try and bring towards equality the way in which they treat the women and the men. I mean, there's still many aspects which you could question about, but in terms of the summer and the biosecure bubbles, it's been brilliant by the ECB. But I think the next big question is, well, it's all very well in England and Australia, and we're very lucky to be watching cricket in England, but that gap between those two nations and the rest of the world is starting to widen, because not every board will offer the same to the women as they are the men in other nations.
That's what Claire Connor said, the director of women's cricket at the ECB. She has concerns about the women's game globally because of the boards that are going to take such financial hits in the next few months and years because of the COVID pandemic. How are they going to be able to fund the women's game and ensure that it continues to grow? And I should say that a huge credit to the ECB as well, because when these tours were getting cancelled and they knew that there was the potential that maybe the women's side wouldn't play any matches, they were so worried because of how it would look, and they knew they were doing everything they could to make sure that they did play. And it was nothing about the England side of it stopping it happening. It was because of the other boards unable to, either because of politics or whatever, to get the sides over here.
And you know what, Henry? For about the first time ever in my journalism career, I felt sorry for the ECB. I really did, because they had, as you said, done everything right, and it just almost felt so unfair that you'd have this visual contrast between a whole roster of men's cricket. They fulfilled every single international national match they were supposed to play, and the prospect of absolutely nothing for the women, which, you know, I could see headlines forming. So yes, I think very pleased for the ECB, and just to reflect as well what they've put into the women's game.
Right, let's have a look at the top performers across the series then. We'll go through the England batters and bowlers first of all. I think the first thing to say that stands out for me, Alex, is you've got 4 players from the England batting unit that have scored over 100 runs. So Heather Knight, Tammy Beaumont, Amy Jones, Natalie Siver. 4 out of your top 5 all contributing. That's really encouraging.
It really is, and that is their top order set now for the next couple of years, especially in T20 cricket. You know, we're going to have Beaumont, Wyatt, Amy Jones, Nat Siver, Heather Knight, and I just think it's so promising. And then later on in the order, we've got the big hitters, Sarah Glenn, Sophie Eccleston. Anya Shrubsole's been batting 11. She can hit a big ball, so it's really, really promising. And the good thing for me watching on is the team's still really young.
That's the thing, isn't it? All of those names, there's plenty of cricket left in those players. It's not like 10 years ago where it would be Charlotte Edwards who would be scoring all the runs.
Absolutely not. And then that's almost, you know, you could argue that West Indies are kind of where England were 10 years ago when they were relying on 2 or 3 big names. I think there's only one person beyond 30 in this team. She might be reasonably far beyond 30 in Catherine Brunt at the age of 35, but otherwise everybody's in their 20s and quite a few youngsters at that. And to go back to the 4 batters that are sort of up there and scored more than 100 runs, in every single match so far for England, they've had a different top highest run scorer, which I think is remarkable, really. And
it just shows when other people fail, then someone else steps up and takes the challenge on.
Well, Amy Jones talked about this quite eloquently after her innings in the 4th T20 where she scored the highest score, and she was talking about how, yes, everybody wants to take responsibility, but it's such a reassuring thought knowing that you can go in and play with a bit more freedom, that somebody else is going to also be there to support you, both in terms of the rate, the sort of the hitting power, but also, you know, just anchor in innings. Whereas I think this is almost why you could argue that Deandra Dawson's innings for the West Indies, she's the top highest run scorer by a country mile. Why hers have been all the more remarkable, because she didn't have that reassurance. She knew that when she was out, that was probably it. We kind of saw that in the 4th T20. She was out for 5 in the 3rd, 4th ball of the match, and you kind of already knew what was going to happen. So yes, England have this kind of wonderful mental cushion as well as enormous batting talent.
Danny Wyatt is one possible concern. Opening the batting, scores a total of 42 runs across the first 4 matches. That's a little bit of a worry, isn't it?
It is. She hasn't had a score above 20 in 12 innings. And we've spoken about Matthews, how she should move down the order and you know, really try and build an innings. there isn't room for Danny Wyatt to do that in this England team. But I always feel Danny Wyatt is one innings away from a big total and a match-winning total, and that's the difference.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say, isn't it, that Danny Wyatt has never been picked for England based on her consistency. It's based on what we know that she can deliver, and at times has delivered spectacularly. And I almost feel, and I don't know if there's anything to this, sometimes, so Tammy Beaumont has come out and each time has really timed the ball from the off quite well. She loves that backward point cut, for example. And I wonder whether Wyatt almost feels as though she should be up there at the same timing and rate straight away, and almost is trying too hard to compete, when actually you just think, just close your eyes and go. Yeah, she's almost comparing herself to the other end.
Okay, so that's the batting unit. What about the bowlers? Leading the way for England, Sarah Glenn, who's continuing to build this reputation. Alex, leg spin bowler.
Yeah, and to say that she has only played for England a handful of times, she doesn't look out of her depth whatsoever. She's come into this side, she's competing with the world's best T20 spinner, and then they've got Anya Shrubsole, Catherine Brunt at the top of the order. They have a genuine world-class bowling attack.
It seems that way, doesn't it? If you look at Eccleston, Glenn, Brunt, Shrubsole.
And the most exciting thing for England is that they seem to be producing a new sort of superstar every year. I mean, I think probably Eccleston, you could argue her breakout year was last year when she was brilliant against the West Indies. She was brilliant in the T20 World Cup. She's made it to the top of the ICC T20 rankings. And then as soon as she's done that and established herself, you have a mini-me coming through in the form of Sarah Glenn. And it is remarkable. And I think we talked about the age as well. I mean, this is a team that could be there for the next decade. What a luxury.
As well as that, Maddie Villiers, you look at Nap Siver, is continuing to build her reputation as this economical sort of metronome as part of the England T20 attack. Any concerns that while you've got Catherine Brunt and Anya Shrubsole in the side, and inevitably you're going to because of what they've done and what they can do, that maybe the seam bowling reserves aren't quite getting tested?
Yeah, and Catherine and Anya are going to have to retire at some stage. Catherine is 35 years old, and Anya equally has had a long career, so they're both going to retire at what you would think is at a similar time. And on the bench you have Kate Cross and Freya Davis, who you would think are going to take their place, who have 13 T20 caps between them. So if for whatever reason Catherine and Anya don't make the World Cup, then your very established bowling attack becomes a very young bowling attack.
It'll be really interesting to see what England do when they go over to New Zealand and to Australia, because Anya Shrubsole has not had a great series. I think she's one of just two bowlers to have had 100 runs conceded against. It's just the one wicket as well. She was really, she's known for her real hooping in swing. She was struggling really to control it. And I wonder whether that will instigate a change immediately for England going over to the other side of the world in February, March, or whether by that point it's 4 or 5 months away, so yeah. Everything might have changed once more.
Who knows where we'll be. It's an interesting debate, isn't it? One that was had with the England men's team with Anderson and Broad at the end of the summer. One journalist wrote that, what are you doing wasting your time with two bowlers can take wickets in these conditions when you're not trying new bowlers for following them up in the future when they retire? And you could make the same argument about Brunt and Shrubsole, couldn't you?
I guess it's this sort of eternal problem for any coach, isn't it? Do you think about winning here and now? And sometimes there's a good reason for that. Or is there a concerted plan? I mean, you could, the way in which England men, for example, built towards their 2019 World Cup win, they had a concerted plan, and maybe they would have dropped someone like what they did. They would drop both Anderson and Broad from their white ball squads in order to build that team going into the next 4 years. So I guess it depends really what England's plans are.
Has that postponement of the World Cup early next year perhaps put a spanner in the works of those plans? Because there would have been a thought as to, well, maybe that'll be Brunt and Shrubsole at the back end of what they do at the front line for England. Yeah. But now there's an extra year. Does that maybe cause a problem?
Well, it's one of those that I think it's the kind of thing that we like to talk about is would Brunt have retired? And from what I understand, Brunt just wants to keep on going as long as she jolly well can. It doesn't matter if there's a World Cup next year or not. And the way she's bowling at the moment, I mean, all credit to her. Go for it. I think there's always an idea in every cricketer's career that you want to go off in a Steve Waugh style sort of century test at your home ground in Sydney kind of thing. But equally, the kind of player that Brunt is, that Shrubsole is, that they are professionals. They want to play as much cricket as possible. I don't think realistically it is that much difference.
Alex, you know them both well, Brunt and Shrubsole. Do we read too much into these things? Do you think they'll just want to keep playing as long as they can and have no plans and sort of time scale?
I think while they're both still world-class bowlers, there's no reason for them to think about anything else. Catherine is getting better and better.
Yeah.
She's not taking the wickets that she used to, but her economy has been outstanding in this series, and then the wickets come at the other end. So cricket is all about bowling in partnerships, and if Catherine's going at 2 or 3 in an international T20 match, the wickets are going to fall at the other end. So that's where the partnerships are key. And you think, from my perspective, you would have thought Catherine would have retired by now, but my mind's completely changed, and I think carry on, because she's been brilliant.
And she loves to bat as well. I mean, she's got a terrific strike rate as well. I mean, she's almost her own worst critic when she goes into bat. You can see her sort of berating herself under her helmet when she doesn't time one through the middle for 4. So she's just enjoying her cricket. And I think, she had that T20 World Cup a couple of years ago where she was out with that back injury, and that was devastating. I think she really, really missed it as well. She missed being in the team. She missed playing. And Catherine Brunt is of the generation where she never would have thought she would have become a professional cricketer. So she's going to milk it for all it's worth. And so would I if I were Catherine Brunt, absolutely.
What about the West Indies then? Batting-wise, one clear standout performer, as you've mentioned, is Deandra Dottin. It's a worry, isn't it, that when you've got one player that is just so far ahead of anyone else in a side?
It is, and we saw in the first 2 T20s we had opening the batting, Dottin, Matthews, in at 3, Taylor. And then you knew once you got 2 wickets, the game was completely over. So the West Indies reviewed that. They split those top 3 up. And the game isn't completely over when you get a couple of wickets, but equally you now know that the pressure is on Dottin to get that big score if they're in with any chance, because Stefanie Taylor's so good at T20 cricket, but on the international stage she just doesn't perform like she does in franchise cricket, and I can't put my finger on what it is, but her mindset or something needs to change when representing the West Indies.
Yeah, I almost feel that with Stefanie Taylor, she is very aware of having that pressure on her shoulders. The way in which she walks the crease, the way she walks to a press conference after a defeat, she's a world-weary kind of thing. Whereas Dottin, my goodness, she's just an all-round athlete with that confidence. I mean, in my mind, she's a mishmash of some of the best West Indian cricketers of yesteryear. I mean, you think about the strut with which Sir Viv Richards used to walk to the crease. Deandra Dottin's got it. You think about the elegance, the free-flowing cricket that Brian Lara used to play. Deandra Dottin's got that as well. And then you think about the pressure on one person's shoulders, almost lifting an entire team. It's a bit like Shivnarine Chanderpaul in the sort of 90s and 2000 era when the rest of the West Indies men's batting was falling beside her. Deandra Dottin is a composite of all these different characters, and it's exciting for us to watch, and it's a wonderful thing, but it's a real problem for the West Indies.
And what has been good this year, she's back bowling as well.
Oh, yeah.
And she looks slightly slower than she has in previous years, which is bound to happen. She's not bowled for a few years. She's had that shoulder injury. She's probably lost, I want to say probably 6 or 7 miles per hour, but she's still bowling very, very well.
The key is that belief is created in the middle order of this West Indies batting lineup, isn't it? There have been moments when Dottin's batting, you think this could be on. She gets out, and it's very much off.
And you know what? I almost, as I'm saying this, feel as though I'm a bit crazy, but I feel as though it's getting better. I feel as though they're working it out. I think they realise that they can't just put their sort of, their biggest assets right at the top and then knowing that everything's going to fall away underneath. We are starting to see Hayley Matthews, I thought, looked actually pretty comfortable at the crease coming in at number 4. I think 4 she came in. She made 20 odd, I think, in that 30-20, which is the first time she was out of that top order. So she's somebody who I think will enjoy that middle order. And then, there are others that can hit a long ball, that have been batting in and around. It's about that. Well, it's consistency, isn't it? And it is getting better. It's hard to put a finger on it. The stats don't really read particularly beautifully, but I feel as though the kind of despair that there was last year in the whitewash it has gone.
And we have to remember the West Indies have a few players at home. So King's still at home. Their best wicket takers still at home. So they are building this team. We've seen Campbell get 35 off 25 balls in the last game. So they are definitely getting better. It's now, I just feel they're just a few years behind where the top teams are. But if they go back and work on that, they are a destructive side and have the potential to be one of the world's best.
What have we learned this series, Izzy?
That I think Heather Knight has I think she's reached the stage where she's moulded her own team. She's been captain for a few years now. First of all under Coach Robinson, Mark Robinson, and I think he was probably the dominant figure in the leadership set up there, having first had Charlotte Edwards and then sort of taken things over a little bit. He led them and with Knight as well to the World Cup win in 2017. But since the change of coach, having Lisa Keightley, you feel as though because Knight was she had already been there, she knew what was happening. She's now a bit more in charge, and you feel as though the team. I mean, they've always respected her, but they trust her. They want to play to her style. She's definitely the kind of disappointed mother figure rather than I'm going to shout the house down. And she herself is so reliable in all aspects of the game. I mean, she's a sort of a comfortably consistent middle order batter. You know, she's the kind of player that walks the crease and you feel comforted by it. You think, oh, everything's going to be all right now that Knight's there. And the bowling as well. I mean, she criminally sort of underuses herself, but she's somebody that they can turn to when the pressure is on. And then her figure of fielding magnificence in the at extra cover is now just one of those sort of givens in the game of world cricket. This is Heather Knight's team, and I think we're seeing that now in all its glory.
From the outside looking in, Alex, and I know that, you are still very close with a lot of the team. You're still in and around that setup. You'll have a bit of a sense of how the team is. Would you agree with what Izzy says? Yeah,
100%. I feel like now they've got this new coach, it feels like a new team.
Yeah.
You know, this coach gives Heather a bit more freedom. So therefore she can mould the team, and yes, Lisa is in charge, but Lisa's very much a coach where it's Heather's team, and we're the support staff, and yes, we'll pick the team together, but you can just sort of sense that they're all enjoying it now. They all want to be there, and it's a very exciting future.
Is there a comparison to be made between, say, Owen Morgan and Trevor Bayliss, therefore?
Oh, interesting. I've never really thought about that. Sort of just let them get on with it. The laissez-faire approach to cricket coaching, I think it probably is, yeah. And they were equally as successful.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it progresses, and certainly going into a major tournament, not in February, March of 2021, but now of 2022. There's plenty of time now for that relationship and that identity to continue to be built.
Yeah, they have. They've got so much time because they've got next year's cricket has all been cancelled. We don't know what's coming up next summer for England. We know they've got the tour to New Zealand, but they've just got time to build this team. And with their 3 spinners all being 21, they've just got so much time.
But the way you're looking, Alex, tells me that you're really optimistic about it, and you sense that there is possibly just the sort of hints of something quite special.
It really is. It's one of those teams where you go, well, actually, how is anyone else going to break into this team? How is another spinner going to knock Sophie Eccleston, Sarah Glenn and Maddie Villiers out of this team? Because I genuinely don't think they can.
It's amazing, really, because I think one of the wonderful things of the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy was we saw some domestic players really excel at a in a way that they haven't had the opportunity to on a stage. They haven't had an opportunity to in previous years, because you'd have even the Kia Super League, you had your 3 England internationals, you had your 3 overseas internationals, and someone like Georgia Adams looked sublime, $1 million. And then somebody asked the question, from a pragmatic perspective, well, when are you going to get picked for England? You go, well, actually, probably not anytime soon, to be honest, because they had 24 already in the Derby bubble before they whittled it down to their squad of 15, and they are settled. I think George Adams couldn't have done much more this summer to be battering that door down, but realistically I don't see her making her way into the team anytime soon.
Well, let's have a little look at the Rachel Hayhoe Flint competition and domestic women's cricket this summer, because again that was a massive question mark as to whether we'd see anything, and we can hear from the head of women's cricket at the ECB, Claire Connor, who's been speaking to Rob Bonnet on the Today programme.
Well, we didn't know when we'd next be leaving our homes at one stage, did we? Let alone wondering when we'd see cricket pitches and sports pitches full again. So, yeah, that was a real threat. And, we had to have very flexible plans. I think, we did a lot of planning and we took some decisions quite late, but we're absolutely delighted that we've been able to put on the first year of our new regional domestic competition. It was great to see those players having that opportunity at Edgbaston.
Yes, well, you'll be delighted with this too, no doubt. A nice quote from Vipers coach Charlotte Edwards, another former England captain, after her side's win at Edgbaston. "Today isn't about us," she said. "Today is about domestic women's cricket in this country. It's thriving." Well, from your perspective at headquarters, what's the actual evidence for that?
Well, the evidence is that we monitor growth. So we monitor how many women and girls are playing and how many club sections have developed. We've seen women's and girls club cricket grow by over a third in terms of the number of sections since we won the World Cup in 2017. And we're
that
seeing
development
more and more
at the grassroots is important, isn't it, Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. It's where you instill, hopefully, a lifelong love of the game. You know, you get boys and girls picking up cricket bats from a young age, and you hopefully give them good experiences in the game, and they stay with you, whether as a player, a fan, or whatever, a ticket buyer. And so, yeah, you know, it's we've got a lot more girls coming through the pathway from a young age, and we've got a lot more talent. And this new structure that we've launched this year is really about deepening that talent pool and providing those players with a pathway, professional opportunities in a domestic game for women for the first time, and ultimately to underpin the England team's success as well.
Well, the thoughts there of Claire Connor speaking to Rob Bonnet on Radio 4's Today programme, and a lot of credit, again, has to go to the ECB for getting this competition on, and for the fact that we did see a high standard of domestic women's cricket culminating in that final at Edgbaston.
Yeah, it was a brilliant competition to be a part of. It was kind of a summer where, personally, I didn't think we were going to play cricket at all. I'm not sure the ECB thought we were going to play cricket at all, and for them to get that competition on, it's just been fantastic, and the standard of cricket has been so good, and I've been really, really impressed.
Izzy, dare we say it, but 3 or 4 years ago, there were envious glances south of the equator towards Australia about the setup that was providing this production line of top-quality international players. Is England starting to resemble that with tournaments like the Kia Super League, like the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy, that are just starting to create a higher standard at the level below England?
Yeah, and like the 100, actually. I mean, obviously we haven't had the opportunity to see it this year, and okay, you can argue that the 100 format is certainly different to T20, but these are tournaments. The 100, I think, is important because it's like the WBBL and BBL in that they are sort of two men's and women's team for each club, but they're put on the same platform. They're marketed in the same way. They're given the same facilities. They're kind of one big happy family, and that's what the 100 does. And I think that's really important because it does raise the standards. It does make you feel like a real professional player, that you're in there with the best of the best, whether it be a man or a woman. So I think that's important. I think the Kia Super League has been a much needed bridge. I think England are behind Australia because Australia have had this set up for longer, but they're catching up, and they're catching up fast. And I think the next 5 years, as Alex was saying earlier, is certainly exciting.
Alex, take me back 5 years. If you're playing for a team the level below England, if you are not an England player but you are perhaps one rung below, as I say, what's the standard like compared to what it's like now? Has it changed hugely?
Yeah, it's, you know, the only standard we had below England was county cricket, and there was that many counties. All the best players were diluted into all of these leagues and all of these, like, you know, Division 1, Division 2. I think we had like 6 divisions at one stage, and it was just ridiculous because you weren't playing the best standard of cricket that you could. And then there was such a massive jump from county cricket to England. A lot of the girls get there or get selected for the England Academy, and they're so far out of their depth because they haven't been exposed to high standard of cricket.
You'd agree with that, Izzy? You've played that level as well?
Yeah, I mean, I got into the England Academy and pretty much had to leave about a year later because I was so far out of my depth. So I think I'm a living, breathing picture of that, absolutely. And I think it was also at a time when England women, you know, in the last decade had become professional. So there was that monetary thing as well. I remember, I think it was the winter they became professional and playing a county game against Surrey, where Nat Siver had the benefit of a winter being a professional women's cricketer. And we kind of scrabbled together, you know, a couple of sort of early morning sessions up in a dark, damp cricket school on a Sunday morning, and coming into the first match of the season, and you know, you're just thinking, oh my goodness me, I just don't want to be here, because she was hitting it that well, and you just didn't, you know, no matter how good you were in a way, you just didn't have the same sort of approach over the winter, the support, the training, the sheer bat on ball time. So yes, the gap. There was definitely a point. I think it was the 2015 Ashes where it was really quite evident that the gap between the domestic, completely amateur game for the women in England and the England professional internationals was absolutely huge. And at that point, you're thinking, goodness, this could take years and years and years to get back. But the ECB have, to their credit, they have looked a lot down under. I think they won't step away from saying that, and they have moved pretty quickly. So I think that there's definitely a mood change, I feel, among the top sort of echelons of the ECB hierarchy and the decision makers, that not only do they want to invest in women's cricket because it's the right thing to do, and because also it's one of the areas of the game that's growing, so in 10-20 years time it's going to be financially viable, but also because cricket now needs women's cricket, in order to attract sponsors, in order to market in a world which gender equality is, we're talking about it a lot more, thank goodness. The men's cricket almost needs women's cricket just as much as the other way around.
Alex, Claire Connor said to the BBC a few days ago, the worry is that other boards around the world won't be able to invest the same level of finance, focus and commitment that the England and Wales Cricket Board and one or two others are more easily able to do because of the situation and the financial pressures that have been caused by the global pandemic. And while on one hand it's really good that England are catching up, there is another argument to say it's a little bit worrying if England and Australia just pull away from the other countries, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you have to look at this summer and the ECB chartering a flight for the West Indies to come over. That costs a lot of money. And I'm just worried that if these COVID times last another year, are we going to see the likes of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, the West Indies? Are they going to pay for other people to go to their country to play women's cricket? It costs them enough money to have women's cricket on as it is. And it is worrying, and obviously as a player my worry is that England, Australia, India to a certain extent are just going to become the top three.
And the game can't afford that. The joy of cricket is the fact you've got a vast diversity of different countries that can beat each other. It's crucial.
Yeah, it is, and I want to sort of stand here and come with a magic bullet and tell you what the answer is, but we can't. I think ICC has got a lot of decisions to make. I mean, they need to think about, they've obviously got a very steep short-term financial pitfall, but then I think, Alex, you're right, in order for the women's game to grow and to be financially viable and profitable in the future, they need to invest in it as well at the same time. I think the ECB are probably torn as well, because on the one hand they are invested in their country and they're doing a very good job of it at the moment and seeing their game grow. But equally, it doesn't help England cricket if they're putting on, they're playing matches that are completely one-sided all of the time.
Yeah, you also see, you think that our team's going to blame COVID for not supporting their women. Are they then going to say, well, we can't afford it because of COVID, when we know full well they're just not supporting their women as they should? Absolutely,
this is the danger. And I think it's something that journalists, I guess, boards, administrators just have to be constantly vocal about going forward, because yes, the danger is that women's cricket becomes a casualty of COVID, and COVID is used as the excuse.
We can't afford that. The game can't afford that, because such strides have been made in the last 5 years that to lose that momentum now would be awful.
And it's not just about the sort of goodwill and the momentum. I mean, women's cricket is a growing game across the world. This is financially a wonderful opportunity in the long term. It's just about trying to balance that short-term investment and knowing that you'll have the long-term game.
And the question is, how long will it all last? Which brings me to the next and final point, which is how are England, West Indies, Australia, all of these countries that face the uncertainty and without the World Cup to look forward to, how are they going to approach the next 12 months? We know that England, in theory, will be heading to New Zealand to perhaps play a tri-series between England, New Zealand and Australia in the new year, maybe February, March time. Beyond that, we know nothing.
Yeah, I think it will be down a lot to individuals as well and how they go about it. I mean, England, obviously, they're fully professional, so those of them that are staying in England over the winter will probably have a training programme and be very focused on that. Nat Siver and Catherine Brunt have signed to go to Melbourne Stars and the WBBL. We understand that a fair few other members of the England team are also intending to go over to the WBBL. I think it does depend a lot on each country. I mean, Australia have a pretty packed couple of months now with that WBBL. Then I guess, yes, they're playing at the moment against New Zealand in a T20 and ODI series, WBBL, then England come over. Oh my God.
Has the chair given way? Is he? Are you okay?
Must have eaten all that cake. Sorry.
First and foremost, are you okay?
I'm fine. I'm a bit startled.
How's the chair? Oh dear. Alex, while Izzy just repairs the furniture, you'd agree with that. It's about trying to work out exactly how boards can go forward and work out what they're going to do.
It is. You just. I'm so distracted. I'm worried about you sitting back.
I'm not going to sit down anymore.
You just don't want, women's cricket being left behind, because there's going to be so much cricket that is on, and so many competitions, and the men, England men, Australia men, New Zealand, all these countries, they're going to be playing men's cricket.
Yeah.
Are the women going to go with?
And that was it. So Australia obviously have a packed season ahead. You feel as though England are going to look after their players as well either way. The West Indies, they haven't got anything. So you've got a handful of the West Indies players that are going to jet off to the WBBL as soon as this series finishes. And then everybody else is just, what is there to look forward to? I mean, I know that they are trying to restructure the domestic game, but it must be such, to have that inequality in one team must be horrid. And I think, they're going to have to do a lot of work in the West Indies to try and get that domestic game going.
Isabel, thank you to you and the poor chair that is now in more pieces than it was when we started this podcast. And Alex,
go and eat some lettuce.
Alex, thank you for your time as well. It's been an enormous amount of fun, and I'm so glad that we have been able to see both England's women playing and some domestic women's cricket as well this summer. We weren't sure we were going to get it, but we have, and it's been a lot of fun.